Guten Abend an alle. Ich freue mich, dass Sie da sind, zahlreich und ganz ordentlich auf den Plätzen laut Corona-Verordnung. Dear Jeremy, a very warm welcome again at Frankfurter Kunstverein after a few days from the exhibition opening. Und wie Sie wissen, das Künstlergespräch ist auf Englisch, aber ich möchte Sie gerne noch mal ein paar Begrüßungsworte zu Ihnen sprechen. Und ich heiße Sie herzlich willkommen bei der Ausstellung von Jeremy Shaw, Phase Shifting Index, die ein Beitrag zum Kanada als Ehrengastland der Buchmesse Frankfurt 2020 ist. Und diese Ausstellung entstand dank der Unterstützung des Canada Council for the Arts und der Regierung Kanada und der Botschaft Kanada. Und heute Abend, Jeremy, you understand German pretty well, I know that, but we decided to have this conversation in English. And one of the questions that I would like to start with is actually a question that we already discussed throughout the years, actually the last months at least, where you defined the title of this installation. Because once we learned from Jeremy, Phase Shifting Index would be the title of this exhibition, we immediately went online and tried to educate ourselves and find out what this term describes. And in German, it means, die Übersetzung ist Phasenschiebeverfahren. So, damit konnten wir erstmal nicht so viel anfangen. Und das ist eine Methode, die in der Optik und in der Physik dafür verwendet wird, um den Abstand von Wellenlängen zu testen. So it's an optical method, but as we learned, it has been only a source of inspiration and not to be translated in this specific meaning.
Yeah, it doesn't really have a specific meaning specifically. It's a sum of its parts. The word phase means various things in English, you know, phases of culture, phases of time, phases of religion, just phases of anything, phases personally. But phase also in the audio context is when two sounds overlap and come together and they start to make that kind of sound. So that's when something is phasing. So that sort of has to do with the moment of synchronicity in these films. And shifting, again, is a similar term that just has quite a wide use, but it's motion. I mean, both of them kind of describe motion. And then an index just being a cataloging of things, an index. So I saw this piece as a kind of indexical work that was showing these different groups, sort of presenting them quite formally in a way. So it's really, it's just the sum of its part. It's not anything specifically. A phase shift is not. Yeah, it's kind of my own invention. Although you did tell me there is a scientific term that I wasn't aware of.
It's hard to make meaning with.
Right.
And the 7-channel installation that you produced anew, and actually we created a consortium of institutions to allow the production of this work, among which the Mona Museum of Tasmania, the Centre Pompidou, the Swiss Institute of the Arts in New York, and Frankfurter Kunstverein. So what we see here is a synchronized installation which develops over several floors. And it's 7 individual films that hint that it's found footage from the past, but in fact it's not at all. And maybe you can explain a bit the recent production and how the development of the production went.
Well, it came to fruition because I was offered the show initially at the Pompidou, and they have a gigantic room. And I had been mostly working with single-channel films, quite narrative, quite linear in form. And I only had a specific amount of time to make a new piece for this gigantic room. So almost out of just like necessity or urgency, I decided to make a multi-channel work. And in doing that, I wanted to push forward from this just sort of straight, short film format, and I wanted to go with something that was immersive, in the sense that it would. Well, wait, that's not the right way to put it. I wanted to create a sort of a bunch of different worlds that would somehow really become immersive, because the word immersive is so overused in the art world. I feel like, you put a couple screens in a room and it's immersive, but I wanted it to sort of almost trick you into that, like that there was these 7 films playing independently, but there was a moment where they truly locked and truly kind of surrounded you and kind of consumed you in their wake. So that was how it evolved originally, was just out of a matter of fitting into a space, like having a really big space and needing to figure out a way to work within it, because I had been working mostly with film and video. So, and then from there, I mean,
casting.
Yeah, like a whole world of, it's similar to the 3 films that I'm talking about. I made a series of short films between 2014 and 2018 called the Quantification Trilogy, in which I was doing this this sort of manipulative thing of making things look like they're found material and then setting them up to be taking place in the future. And so I basically relied on these this sort of set of skills that I had created the past few years to create 7 more of these worlds, but I made them in a sense that they weren't necessarily so linear, that you didn't have to be there from the very beginning to the very end. You could walk from one film to the next and sort of get a piece of each, and that would be hopefully enough for you.
And the 7 films suggest that they have been filmed over the different decades in the 20th and 21st century. And they depict groups of people dancing that have a reference to actual subcultural phenomenon that you have been fascinated about in your past.
Yeah, they all, the material looks like it comes from probably the late 60s or say mid 60s to the mid 1990s, and it goes with the according media from those periods. So from black and white 16mm film up to like high 8 video from the mid 90s, and every group involved is engaged in some sort of embodied choreographic, or not choreographic necessarily, but embodied movement-based practice, a lot of which, or elements of which, have been pulled directly from subcultures, or potentially, the dress style has been pulled from subculture, etc. But then it's been twisted into sort of something new. So you'll see things like the group from the 1960s that appear to be some sort of maybe military or calisthenic group, but they end up doing a dance move from the mid-90s, like something associated with techno music. So it's they're all mixed in there, but they're using the outmoded media and the costuming, etc. I've attempted to what's the word I'm looking for? To sort of congeal them, to make it so that it doesn't seem out of place. That even though the elements are off, it's in an autonomous package that could be believed as being something from that era.
So in Phase Shifting Index, in this most recent work, the body and the collective experience of physical movement and rhythm and breathing and dancing and getting into this altered state of consciousness is kind of like the main instrument of how these people experience transcendence.
Yeah, the work is really, it's about attempting to shift your reality, like physically shift your reality through a belief-based movement practice. So it's like a really embodied belief in what you're doing in an effort to truly change your reality. So yeah, at the core of it, it's, or at least visually, what you're seeing is them, using their bodies as the instrument for this escape.
In the 20 years of your work, you've been fascinated by very different cultural practices that all look into altering these states of consciousness and awareness. In 2004, you did a beautiful series of work, the DMT series, where you've been portraying with a video camera the faces of yourself as well as some of your friends in a state which creates images. I'll let you describe the work, but just to give an impression, it's a close-up of individual people trying to describe in words an experience that they just had among themselves, within themselves, with a drug experience, where you have a lot of imagery going on and literally, yeah, percolating out of your soul somehow. So the challenge was to find a visualization, a key, a new key of describing things which are not visible.
Yeah, that piece, just for reference, is a piece called DMT, where I filmed people taking a super hallucinogenic drug called DMT, which is a synthesized version of ayahuasca, which you hear a lot about in the news lately. So the high on this drug, you smoke this drug and it hits you within about 30 seconds, and you go from being sober to being, if it hits you correctly, you're literally out of yourself, like complete death of ego style experience, where there's no reference, to your reality anymore. And it does this for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then when you come down from this drug, it's a similar trajectory. It's like about a minute, and you come down and you're sober again. It's really literally like being shot up and then shot back down to sobriety. So what happens in the videos is you're seeing people immediately after they've taken the drug, so they're incapacitated basically, and it's just a head and shoulders shot. And what you're watching while they're high on the drug is, well, what you're reading subtitles of them immediately after the experience, trying to put it into words. And so you read a lot of really broken language, and it really pointed immediately to the fact that we don't have the words to describe these experiences, that language really fails in trying to elucidate these transcendental moments. And that's become a theme throughout my work from then on in, was this inability and almost a celebration of this in my work a lot of the time, is this lack of tools we have to translate, these experiences to each other or whatever. And it's not, and that was obviously with drugs, but it goes across the board, I think, with transcendental experiences, spiritual, hedonistic, etc.
And The Quickeners is a work that looks in a similar way to another phenomenon, which is more the spiritual phenomenon or the collective experience of religious phenomenon. And maybe you would like to share some of your thoughts.
Quickeners is a good one to talk about, because it's what first inspired the way I'm working now. Because this is a film where I found material of a Pentecostal Christian snake handling church in West Virginia in 1967. So it's from a documentary movie called Holy Ghost People, of these Pentecostals who handle poisonous snakes during their service as an act of faith. And this is the first time where I started to work in this way, where I'm taking archival material, this is the only time I've done it. But I took this archival material, figured out a way to scramble the language these people were speaking so that I could then present it as my own story. And this is something that has permeated my work all the way to here, where I'm making things look like documentary, then scrambling the language and placing them in the future. So yeah, that's a very different form of achieving some type of catharsis, is a truly faith-based experience, where you're putting your life in danger, I think, in order to show your faith.
You've done also some experimental work with some technology that is used in scientific context to visualize, for example, the aura, well, the MRT you used different technologies to see the bodily reaction of, here again, altered states. That's something that I would like you also to elaborate just a bit.
Yeah, there was a series of works, maybe 8 or so years ago probably, where I was I was very interested in I mean, my work is about altered states, and so that's both the, you know, the cultural attempts to achieve them through religion, through drugs, through dancing, meditation, as well as scientific attempts to locate them and to explain them. And so I'm just as equally interested in that aspect of them, you know. So I got quite interested in the notion of visualization and attempting to somehow map these experiences. I did a lot of work with a type of photography called Kirlian photography, which records, it's kind of a pseudo-scientific object that records the electromagnetic field around objects as a photograph. It was invented in the 30s and brought into scientific studies in the 60s, but it was abandoned because it's impossible to sort of control. But I was using it in an attempt to like navigate music through my body. I was taking photos of myself, of my finger. The Kirlian camera is basically a big charge under a metal plate. And what you do is you put a piece of film or a negative on top of it, and then an object, and then you charge it. So it's like when you touch a Tesla ball, you know, a Tesla coil, and the electricity comes towards your hand. But this records an image of this electromagnetic, or it's the electrocoronal discharge, they call it. And so I would listen to music that I had either had prior experience with as being somehow cathartic to me or somehow transcendental. And record myself, you know, take these photos during the peak of a song, basically, in an attempt to see if I could record the visual effect on my body or on what mystics would call my aura.
So the spiritual component, the emotional component, is something that you look in the effect that it has or the impact that it has on the physicality. It seems to me that this is a recurrent theme in your work. And it seems also to me that it is something that you are trying to imagine as in our far future, or not so far future, as a society and as a collective. Because for phase shifting, you have a voiceover, each of the 7 films, that describe in a post-ante, from the future perspective into a past which is yet in the future, phenomenon that are to come. And these phenomena describe a changed physicality, human physicality, where the human DNA is not merely biological anymore, but altered by technologies, maybe artificial intelligence, and you call it machine DNA. So what is actually this possible perspective that you have upon our future?
I don't know if it's necessarily my own perspective. It's just, you know, they're kind of pastiches of everything I'm interested in, and I don't even really speculate. I think I just create these propositions, you know, of what if, you know, we started experimenting with machine DNA, as I call it, in tandem with engaging in forgotten spiritual rituals from the 20th century, all the while, being in a group of like-minded people. They're really, they're really fantastic, you know, in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I don't really have a position on where we're going to be or where that technology is going. I think with a lot of this scientific stuff, I read and I learn about it and I'm excited by it to a point where I reach critical mass, and then I'm okay with that. That's enough for me. So I don't think I have a clear proposition, or not even, no, I don't have a clear reading on where we're going. I really just
Not
throw
neither
it
do
all
we
together.
expect it.
I throw it all together.
But you do have quite a lot of experience with creating music, DJing, being part of the rave scene, having made drug experiences, having had a lot of religious experience also when you were a child, you were telling us. So you are drawing a lot from experiences that you lived through in first person, and you have been witnessing as social phenomenon, as such, as underground phenomenon. So how much do you actually draw from this personal experience, and how much is an interest about collective and societies and their functioning?
I think the core inspiration probably comes from my personal experiences, you know, when I was younger. And again, like talking about the DMT, that inability to locate and that desire to want more or to try and explain. There's a sense of wonder, I think, involved, you know, that you're sort of constantly searching for. I don't think I'm attempting to recreate those experiences so much, but yeah, I think. Sorry, what was the question about the difference between the group? Okay. Yeah, I think that is the core. You know, I grew up. I don't know how many necessarily religious experiences I've had, but I grew up Catholic until I was a teenager, and so there was always that notion of, you know, something greater, of the religious experience or the spiritual moment, and then of course got into my own paths on a similar vein, but and I think that's definitely informed all of this, you know. But like I was saying earlier, I'm equally as interested in how science is going to tell me, is going to, you know, attempt to sort of deduce what I'm doing, or sort of, you know, quantify it. So it's, I think the inspiration it's really from a lot of places. I think, as you can see in the films, it really, there's so many things I'm interested in. You know, I love watching people dance. I love looking at brain scans. I love watching science fiction films. So it's a real kind of a real alchemical mixture that I try and make autonomous, I think.
And in fact, with this last work, Phase Shifting Index, you are merging a lot of disciplines and faculties that you are interested in, you bring along, because you wrote the text, you co-wrote the text, you are co-author of the music, you are the director of the film material, you have created the choreographies of the dances, of which some of them came around the last 3 weeks, and yeah, they recognize each other, because it's quite it's not a small scene, but the community knows each other. So there's a lot of different languages, artistic, cultural languages, that you're merging to create an experience that the public so far has completely been able to immerse with, or to go along with, to get into a flow with, which is something quite rare, because the observation that we had over the last 3 weeks of exhibition is that not everyone is willing or able to follow each of the speaking parts, but they very well understand physically, emotionally, the climax that the 7 films are taking.
Sure.
So how much directing do you do in the fact of creating these climaxes?
Well, the climax itself is very, very, I mean, the thing about making this one was that it was always known to me that it was going to peak. I mean, basically, I reverse engineered it so that what's happening right now was the kind of crux of the whole work. So I knew that everything had to get to this point where all groups were doing the same choreography. So whatever it took to get to that moment, I had to figure out. But the way that we shoot the films is like, we go in them kind of knowing, I know about 40%, I would say, of the story, 40% of what I want it to feel like, what these people are about. And from there, so we shoot it this way, like a documentary, kind of workshopping and letting the camera roll, and the dancers, the performers, they really go to these pretty extreme lengths, you know, at times during the performance or during the shooting. And then from that material, the story really evolves in the edit, and that's where the narration comes in, and the subtitles are added to what the people had said. So it's a really kind of, I would say, like, yeah, 50-50, 60-40 kind of almost intuition-based, you know, how we shoot them in the documentary, in this documentary style. But with this one, really, there was already in my mind this dramaturgy of 7 films that independently operate. They start to unfold, everything goes a little crazy for a few minutes, and then they lock into the sync, which is exactly what is happening right now. And then from that, they again twist, you know. So I really had it kind of plotted out dramaturgically, but I didn't know, you know, say 50% of the details of what would be going on within these worlds.
And the aesthetic of each of the individual films, some of them look like VHS, 16 mil, it's all thanks to post-production.
Yeah, but it's real. Like, it's all, you know, the 16 millimeter film has been, we shoot everything digitally, but then we print it to 16 millimeter film, we play it 100 times on a projector, we scan it back into the computer, we take the digital video, put it onto VHS tape, play them back and forth. So they're truly on those analog mediums, and that's, I think, you know, a huge part of this desire to create these autonomous, sort of out-of-time objects, you know, that seem unquestionably from another time in the formal sense, but then are, you know, full of aspects that create this cognitive dissonance with the telling you it's something set in the future, etc. That's a real massive part, and that's always related to me. I'm really interested in this, or I really like gaining this kind of familiarity from people. When you see 16 millimeter, when you see VHS, you don't expect to be surprised by it. You know, you think that it's historically sound, it's something that's happened. It's not going to really, you know, surprise you in any way. It's happened, and I found that to be a really, you know, it's a really fertile place to be subverting things. So that's yeah.
And as much as you are fascinated by the warmth of historical imagery and the technologies of filming, as harsh is the break after this sequence now, where everything turns into a digital glitching. And in the digital glitching, you use a completely different technology that I was really interested in when we were here spending time installing the show. How do you actually work the glitches?
Well, that's a process. So if anyone hasn't seen it, yeah, it's like a moment where everything that's analog looking, 16 millimeter, VHS, etc., sort of that ruptures into this very digital landscape. And that's a process called data moshing, which is basically it's an error. It's an error where a frame is missing from one of the videos, and it prints the last frame of the edit onto the next frame. So it's this really kind of unruly, sort of wily process where you can't really control it. And it's been something I've been interested in. You know, it's something you see when you're downloading something and it's not downloading fast enough, so the screen drags, etc. And I've been interested in that for a long time, because it was, when I first started seeing it, it really, to me, looked psychedelic, like in the true sense of the term. I've always been really disappointed with people's representations of psychedelic experience, and I found this data moshing technique to truly feel like a psychedelic experience, where it's something that's just kind of out of reach. And so that's what we've used in that section, is really, we've tried to really amplify this data mosh process to create something really like a real rupture in the mediums. So yeah, they go from, like you said, like this very warm, you know, nostalgic almost feel to something totally foreign.
And because you are mentioning the psychedelic or the LSD shapes, colors, the fastness of the images merging, this transition will never end. Is the beginning of the exhibition with which we open the show downstairs and which we leave on until 1 o'clock at night. And it's a collection of samples, of pieces that over the last 10 years, 12 years, you have been fascinated looking and collecting in the different movies, Hollywood movies, film series, and different sort of like sources, and that now you sampled. What is the thing that interests you there?
Well, it's like an archive of any moment in a film or television show where the representation from one reality to another is depicted using the vortex or the tunneling, sort of spiraling image, which is something that we seem to have agreed upon as you know, as valid to represent this transition. So you see it from, you know, like you said, from Oscar-winning Hollywood films to like the lowest lowbrow television programs. Everyone agrees that this is what this means when you put it on the screen. So it's yeah, it's just like a catalog really of these moments where we rely on visual effects because it's something that we also cannot yet document. It's not something that we can, you know, tap into in someone's brain if they're having this experience. So yeah, it's this notion of attempting to represent the experience or to translate the experience of altered states.
So lots of time it seems to me that you're looking for metaphors that we kind of may convey on when imagining imagery that we are not able to share among each other, because it's a very intimate, a very personal and private experience, like the ones that you have with the religious, with the spiritual, in a spiritual moment, with transcendence through meditation, with LSD or ayahuasca. These are very personal, very intimate experiences, and yet you're fascinated with the potential of trying to find metaphors. Is that something that you would describe this way?
I don't know if metaphors is the right term. Yeah, I mean, it's more the translation aspect that interests me, you know, and just I mean, maybe that's metaphor, but and to me, to be honest, it's become a celebration of the inability to do it, and I think that carries out through a lot of my practice, is the kind of point where you cannot explain it to anyone, and I guess that's where the scientific element comes in, is their sort of attempt to do this for us. Yeah.
In the trilogy that you're currently showing at Stoschek's in Berlin, it seems that one of the points that at least the points that I took away with, is that there's a sort of nostalgia from the perspective of a future where somebody is imagining a humanity that lost its ability to believe in spirituality. And this loss is something that has occurred through too much belief into science, where science has been substituting religious attempts, or where quantification of each phenomenon that defines humanity or the personal, spiritual aspects have altered.
Yeah, the three films are called the Quantification Trilogy, and they all hinge on a fictional scientific discovery that all transcendental spiritual experience is basically reduced to the same set of synaptic firings in the brain, or they basically discovered exactly what happens in the brain during a spiritual experience, and therefore most people have discounted it because they believe that if it's all the same, then it's not valid, basically. So these films hinge on this fictional discovery, or that then leads people to stop having faith and stop believing. And so what you witness is a society that, say, 80 years from them, then learn scientifically that there was actually a portion of the brain that was dedicated to faith that is now atrophied because it hasn't been used in so long. And so you witness the fallout of a society that has stopped believing, or stopped having the ability to have faith or to believe.
And what would that mean for you, a humanity or a society that has stopped the ability of having faith?
I think it would be sad, yeah, for sure. I'm a real believer in people's belief.
Believer in people's belief. That's a belief of second degree, I imagine.
I'm really compelled by people's faith and by people's belief, and whether that's in science or in Christianity, it's egal to me. Yeah.
So you rather observe the phenomenon of belief than believing yourself?
Than believing in myself? I think I believe.
Do you have a belief yet? Or still?
Oh, like a spiritual practice? I don't want to comment on that, really.
Too intimate.
I believe in a lot of things.
We look at your work and imagine. Okay. Talking about belief, all these objects that are disposed here in this space are actually imageries that you found in databases, in image bases that you have assessed, that has been de-assessed from magazines, as far as I understood.
Newspapers, yeah.
Newspapers?
Yeah.
And that you have used to select images that are real images, they are not staged, and just enlarged, and then you produced an object with this prismatic frame that is quite heavy, in fact, but produces this beautiful, fragmented imagery that focuses on individual parts of people that obviously physically express a strong moment of ecstasies, of belief, of transcendence. It's part of a series, and these are the new pieces. When did it start that you've been interested in this sort of process?
These started in 2016. I started working with them, but I had been collecting these archival photographs from newspapers that had, I guess they had digitized all their images and were just selling off their original photos. So I had started buying these photos of people in some type of, generally looking for people in some type of cathartic state. These ones here are all definitely spiritual based, but there's also, I have hedonistic and even technological looking images. So in 2016 I started working on creating a way to make these prisms that really kind of explicitly illustrate that these people are witnessing, are experiencing some type of altered state, and using these different images, like I said, from spiritual or hedonistic practices under the same lens. So kind of using this really cliche way of representing altered states, the prism, which is used in a lot of sort of psychedelic visuals, etc., from the 60s on, but using this to illustrate all sorts of different altered states, not just the psychedelic or the hedonistic ones you would generally expect to see them represented. with.
So, am I right if I would describe you as a scientist that is creating a personal index of people that are living an experience of transcendence? And if so, if that would be the case, in 20 years of observing these sort of individual, personal, intimate states, what did you learn about them? What do you think is the inner trigger, or what is the key, the core experience that we are all looking for when we go through these sort of experiences?
Well, I'm definitely not a scientist, but I don't think I know what it is. I think what I'm most compelled by is this seemingly universal desire to somehow experience this cathartic, this transcendent state that spans across all these different cultures, all these different subcultures. Goes back to the cavemen, you know. When I was 7 or 8 years old, we used to play a game where we would knock ourselves out. We would choke each other, so we would black out and come up sort of dazed. So I think this exists in humans, you know.
And what is it where we're looking for there in that realm, in that border?
Something beyond the reality that we're sort of presented with. I think it's, you know, however extreme that is for you. And then for others, they need to, you know, have really limited experiences with pain and with drugs, etc. But I really do think it's an inherent quality in humans that is nurtured and developed, you know, culturally, obviously, case to case. But I really think it's there naturally.
And the body, what role does the body play in this?
I guess it depends on your chosen method, really. I mean, could be, you know, if you're a dancer, I think it plays a huge role in it. I think a large part, to me, has always been a notion of escaping the body, in a sense, you know, escaping the sort of physical. So I think it can play a huge part, for sure.
And another thing that I would like to leave you with is look at the trailer of the exhibition that Jeremy and I shot after the opening. Share it and hopefully say all the best about this beautiful show, this beautiful work of Jeremy Shaw. And thank you for having done this with us at Frankfurter Kunstverein. Thanks, Jeremy.
My pleasure.